All right, welcome to the Freedom Unchained channel. Another lesson from George Gordon, Common Law School. So please, if you haven't started in the beginning of this lesson or the beginning of the course, please go to the playlist that will be in the description right at the top. Click on the playlist and watch from the beginning so you can get a good understanding of what common law is and how you act as man. Or he calls it a natural person, but I say natural persons and men are different. I think, is calling a man a natural person, but a person cannot be natural because a person is created. A person is a persona, it's a mask. It's not a creation of God. Man is a creation of God. That's how you get your rights, because if you are a man, then you get your rights from God, not the government. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please comment. Share the video around to all your slave buddies that haven't become free yet, or haven't realized that they are slaves and they need to become free, because a lot of people haven't become free yet, but they're working on it. They're trying to figure it out. If you're the one trying to figure it out, you need your friends to jump on board to be free. So it becomes easier for everybody else to become free. Once we deprogram everybody, then share this video around. Let's help out all of our other friends and family in the communities that we live. And so let's just get to it.
Well, greetings again. We're going to take up lesson 2 today, which we call the scene of the crime. To give you a little introduction to the scene of the crime, let's keep in mind that the objective of every citizen when he goes into the courtroom is to win. As I've taught my students for years, there's only winners and losers in that courtroom. And if you come out with anything short of a victory, then you're a loser. In order to win, you must begin your strategy for victory at the scene of the crime. And by the time you get to the end of this 30 lessons, you're going to begin before the scene of the crime. You're going to be knowledgeable in such a way that before you even contemplate an act or an intent and an act which constitutes a crime, you will be prepared to determine whether or not you're the type or the status of person who can commit the act. Now, I know that sounds a little strange. After having seen lesson 1 with Bob, you may be a little befuddled as to how can this be? Do you mean that there are people who have status that exempts them from some laws? Well, let's think about this for a moment. Did you sign up in January as a resident alien? And did you sign up for the draft? Now, if you answered the questions, no, I didn't, you need to ask yourself, well, why didn't I? Aren't you 18? Doesn't that draft law say all persons shall? Well, if it says all persons shall, then shouldn't you do it? Aren't you one of those persons? First thing that you need to understand then is that not all persons come under all statutes at all times. Some persons are exempted or excluded from the statute in some other methodology. When you're talking about resident alien, you say, well, I was born in the United States, so therefore I'm not a resident alien and I'm not subject to that law. And you'd be correct. Well then, if you're talking about the scene of the crime, if a policeman came up and said, I'm going to arrest you for failure to register as a resident alien, wouldn't you stipulate to the facts, but officer, you're making an error here. I'm not subject to that law. I'm a natural-born citizen. Or if the officer came to you and said, you didn't register for the draft, and so therefore I'm going to arrest you and take you to jail, wouldn't you say, well, wait a minute. I think you're making a mistake here. I think that this law doesn't apply to me. I'm 40 years old. I think that I'm exempt from that. So when I tell you, or Bob tells you, that when I drive 80 miles an hour down the freeway, I'm not breaking any law, could it be that there are some persons who are exempted from that statute or from that group of laws? Well, I think now you're beginning to see that that's true. When the word all persons is used in its meaning in law, it means all persons to whom this statute applies. And at the beginning of every body of law, there is a enabling statute, and that enabling statute will describe what this law is intended to do and who it is intended to apply to. And when you see an enabling statute, you can determine whether or not you're a person who is required to obey or to follow that particular group of statutes. All right, so when we get to the scene of the crime, we may or may not want to stipulate to the facts depending upon your status. Now, in my case, since I don't have a driver's license and my car is not registered and I don't have any insurance on it, I'm not obligated to the statutes of interstate commerce, intrastate commerce, that Garrett Freight Lines, let's say, is obligated to in trade, commerce, business, and industry on the roads, because I'm claiming to drive on my roads as a matter of right. And since I'm driving as a matter of right, it comes under the term liberty. I have the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, if you look up the word liberty, you'll find that it is the inalienable right to will yourself to move from point A to point B without being inhibited in any way, shape, form, or manner. And when my police officer stops me halfway between point A and point B, he has made an intrusion upon my privacy pursuant to the Fourth Amendment. And when he has done that, he has violated my rights. And so my first reaction is to say, "Officer, what is your probable cause?" And that's the proper legal response. Probable cause under the Fourth Amendment. Anytime that there is a custodial stop, and any routine traffic stop is a custodial stop, you are in custody. Ask the question, am I free to leave? If he says, yes, you are, thank you very much, have a nice day, officer, and drive off. And I've never had that happen. They always say, no, you're not free to leave. Well, then I must be held in a custodial capacity pursuant to Miranda or the Terry rule. Is that correct, officer? Well, conversation breaks right down. As soon as you start quoting Supreme Court law, never saw a policeman yet that could stay on point or even begin to hold the conversation, because policemen don't understand law. Policemen understand regulations and rules, because policemen are military-type people. They are taught and trained to do what they're told, to do it when they're told to do it, and not to ask questions. Now, a free and natural citizen who wants to have rights at law has got to know and understand the law. All right? Now, there are 19 basic rules that a pro se must follow if he's going to become a free man. And these are 19 rules. And if you'll open up your little file folder that you received with this letter, the one that says Lesson 2 on it, you'll find in there this paper, and it has 19 basic rules on it. Take your 19 basic rules, and let's run over the basic rules that segregate or make a distinction between the military mind of the policeman and the civil mind, the legal mind of a citizen at law, to determine what it is that I must do and what it is that I must not do in order to protect my rights at the scene of the crime, or at any confrontation you're going to have with any government official at any time, at any place, in any capacity. Whether it's the Department of Labor or the Department of Employment, or it can be OSHA or EPA, it can be the traffic cop, the policeman on the beat. I don't care who it is, a tax assessor. Anytime you have a confrontation with a government official, you've got to maintain your status, and you have to sit down and live up to the basic rules of procedure that the courts are going to recognize. And these people are trained to gain admissions and confessions. They want just little innuendos and admissions, positions that you either have taken in the past or that they can put words in your mouth and cause you to take right at this moment in time to get you into a position where you will pay the tax, you will pay the fine, you are guilty, you have done this, you have volunteered into this capacity. And I start off with rule number 1. The 3 most important rules of a pro se are: don't say anything, keep your mouth shut, and shut up! Yes, sir. Now you'll remember that, because 90% of all of the convictions that come down in the United States are made by admissions and confessions. That's right, 90%. What that means is that if you can just keep your mouth shut, you have a 90% chance of winning. But let me also go on to say that you've been taught in your public schools to spill your guts and to give any amount of information to anybody who asks you for it for any reason whatsoever. On a traffic ticket, as an example, when the policeman says, "What's your name?" George Gordon. "Where do you live, Mr. Gordon?" 1205 North Roosevelt Street. I say, "And your zip code, sir, is 83706. And your date of birth, 7/30/39. And your social security number, 555228972. I see. And are you married, Mr. Gordon? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many children do you have, Mr. Gordon? 5. Mm-hmm. And are you employed, Mr. Gordon? Yes. Mm-hmm. And where are you employed, Mr. Gordon? I work at Circle K. Oh, I see. You see what I'm beginning to tell you? Let me ask you a question. If you're talking to a traffic policeman, of what importance is it to him as to when you were born? Gotcha. Is he going to send you a birthday cake? Was he going to send you some present? Is he going to throw a party for you? Social security number, was he going to send you a social security check? Is he going to make some investigation pursuant to your old age or your retirement? Is he concerned about when you're going to retire? You ever go to a school and your children are in school and you've been called to school for one reason or another, and the administrator there says to you, "Are you Kathleen Gordon's father?" "Oh, yes, I am." Mm-hmm. "And how long have you been married? Who are you married to? What's your wife's name? What's your social security number? What's your date of birth?" And don't you always just answer because they ask you the question? And isn't the rationale always, well, if you don't have anything to hide, then why wouldn't you answer those questions? Well, why don't we look at it another way? Slaves answer everything that's asked of them because of their status in life. But does a free man have to divulge all of his innermost secrets? What if I don't have a social security number? Wait until that one blows them away. Guy asks you, "You have a social security number?" Or they'll ask me, "What is your social security number? Why do you want to know?" "Well, I need it." "What for?" "Well, I need it I need it because the form says social security number, and I'm a bureaucrat and I don't understand how to function in life unless you'll answer these questions." "Well, I don't have one." "Now what are you going to do?" "You don't have a social security number?" No. "Well, how do you go downtown?" "I usually take the car." Well, do you have a driver's license?" "Why do you want to know?" What relevance does a driver's license have with the problem my little girl's having in school? You begin to see what's happening here. People want to identify you, and there's this file folder. There's some kind of a secret file on you, and all of this information goes into your file. And if they don't have this information, then they don't know how to function because they've been trained in the government schools to function pursuant to questions and answers on forms. Does that remind you of Germany in World War II or remind you of Russia? Why does a man have to have a social security number, a driver's license, or any records whatsoever? What relevance is it to you whether my name is George Gordon or Sam Spade? I told you it was George Gordon. If I'd have told you it was Sam Spade, what do you care? All you're looking at is a face on a TV screen. It's not relevant to you what my name is. And yet people say, "Oh, he's got something to hide. He doesn't want to tell us his name." Well, in Idaho, I'm anybody I say I am. And what if I wanted to change my name to Joe Baloney? What business is that of yours or anybody else's? if it's not used to defraud, lie, cheat, steal, or in some way deprive somebody of his life, liberty, or property, what I want to call my same by phonetic vowel sounds isn't anybody's concern but mine. And yet, the very first thing that you'll find in pro se law in that courtroom is that they're going to start asking you questions, gaining information and answers. And the first mistakes you're going to make is to answer the questions. And that's why I tell you the hardest thing that there is to do is to keep your mouth shut. It takes training. Call me on the telephone. Hello? Who is this? Who wants to know? That's my first question. After all, you're calling me on my telephone. Why would I want to tell you who I am? What business is it of yours? If I wanted to talk to you, I'd call you. And if you didn't want to talk to me, you didn't have to answer the phone. You know, privacy is one of the basic, foundational, fundamental building blocks of a free society. And the Fourth Amendment is the amendment that protects your privacy. And there isn't a private person in the United States. You tell me where there's a private person and I'd like to meet him. I'm not private. Well, I got married with a marriage license. I was in love and didn't understand the contractual agreement involved. I've had driver's licenses and I've been involved in interstate commerce and corporate capacity. Why, I must have a file folder an inch thick with all of the admissions and documentations and the bank records and checks and all the rest of it. So I'll concede right off the bat that I'm not a private person. And the first thing we do with our children is fingerprint them and categorize them and register them with our government. And the first question I've got to ask you is, what proprietary interest does the government have in your children? Whose are they, the government's or yours? Well, the truth of the matter is, if you're married with a marriage license, the children belong to the government because there's a third-party contractual agreement between you, your wife, or your husband, and your government. And if you think that's wild, you know, and off the wall, and that's some kind of radical doctrine, did you go to your government to get permission to go to baptism last time you were there, to baptize a child? Do you go to your government and get a license to take communion or to attend church? I thought marriage was a religious function. What government have sticking its nose into the religious business of the citizens? Well, I never asked that question when I got married, and you probably didn't either. We'll talk about this thing of marriage and licenses in later lessons, but being able to keep your mouth shut is the biggest order of business that you're going to have to contend with if you're going to become competent as a pro se in that courtroom. So keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, and shut up. You will never get in any trouble for anything you don't say. That came from one of our less known presidents, a fellow named Calvin Coolidge. And I picked that up from him, and I think that's good sage advice, and any judge in the country would second that bit of wisdom. On item number 2, all of the evidence that will ever be used against you will be furnished by you. That's right. All of the evidence in that courtroom is going to be furnished by you. So whenever you're doing something, when you're contemplating an act, you want to be looking ahead to the ramifications that could come down from that act or omission. Number 3, every case you do will eventually be decided by the United States Supreme Court. When you begin the road through the judicial process, you must make up your mind whether it's a traffic ticket or whether it's some charge by a government bureaucracy or a tax case, that you ultimately want that case decided by the Supreme Court of the United States. And every student that goes through this school is taught and trained to prepare that case to qualify for the Supreme Court. You know, probably less than 1% of the cases that are litigated in the United States would qualify for the Supreme Court. Lawyers don't know how to qualify cases. And of course, citizens don't know how to lay the foundation at the scene of the crime or in the jailhouse scene or in the courtroom or in pretrial motions and briefs and theories of the case, etc., in order to qualify that to create a major federal question. Every student, right at the scene of the crime, if there is no major federal question involved, you will create a major federal question right there at the scene of the crime. And I'm going to show you how to create the federal question that will ultimately have to be answered in Washington. And by the way, to argue that case to Washington is going to cost your government about $60,000. So just ask yourself, does your county want to spend $60,000 to find out if you're a person required to stop at stop signs? I haven't found any yet. And this is one of the stratagems that we use and employ. And that is, it's not an issue any longer as to whether or not you ran the stop sign. The issue becomes, why did you deny the man due process of law and equal protection of the law, or counsel of his choice, or a right to defend? Those are the major federal questions. And we're going to learn how to use each and every one of those and 20 more. Number 4, we will accept nothing short of total victory or total defeat. You know, most people are willing and happy to go into that courtroom and settle for whatever the government will settle with. The typical ploy that's used is they'll charge you with 3 crimes and then tell you, well, we'll be real nice fellas, and if you'll plead guilty to one of these, we'll drop the other 2 charges. That sounds like bargain day at Macy's, doesn't it? You know, you get 3 for the price of 1, or we'll only charge you with 1. Look at what a deal we're making. You know, even our courts have that philosophy. Well, ordinarily that fine's $28.50, but I'm a nice guy today, and I'm going to lower that to $19.95 today only. You ever seen that in the traffic court? You know, I'm a nice guy today. I doubt very seriously if most people who go into the courtroom ever think about rights. What they're really thinking about is, how can I confess to this crime and instead of paying $30 only pay $20? Did it ever occur to you that when you walk in the courtroom you shouldn't pay anything because you're not guilty? That a crime requires intent as well as an act, and when you're driving 80, where was the intent, and can the government prove intent? And if they can't prove a crime, and if they can't prove a crime, why should you plead guilty to something your government can't prove? Well, you'll have to ask that for yourself, but let me tell you this, if your attitude is anything short of total victory, you can't function in the courtroom. What we have to do in the courtroom is go in with the mental attitude, as this case is going to the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., and I'm demanding all of my rights at all times, and I am not going to plead or cop out to a plea in any way, shape, form, or manner. So pack your suitcase, Mr. Prosecutor, because you're going to Washington with me, and we're going to litigate this case in Washington, D.C. Number 5, what is or is not law can only be determined by the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution decides for us what is and is not law. A law that is unconstitutional from the time it's enacted, not from the time it's overturned. And to use a vernacular cliche, you know, blacks in the South were forced to ride the back of the bus for many, many years. In fact, 136, as I recall, in Birmingham. There had to come a time when someone challenged that law. And this black lady got on the front of the bus and said, I'm not going to ride the back of the bus. As we colloquially call it out here in Idaho, this nigger ain't riding the back of the bus. You got that? Now, poor bus driver, you know, he's been driving this bus for 20 years and he just doesn't understand. He can't comprehend. This is insane to him. There's the statute says so right up there on the front of the bus. You know, blacks ride the back of the bus, and here's this lady up here in the front. Okay? It doesn't occur to the average Joe Schlock or John Q. citizen out there that this law doesn't apply to him. As a matter of fact, that particular law didn't apply to anybody because you couldn't discriminate against a citizen. You might have been able to send some black to the back of the bus who was from Tanganyika, but you couldn't send a black to the back of the bus who was a natural citizen or even naturalized citizen. And so the issue ultimately had to be decided by the Supreme Court, didn't it? The city ordinance or the state law in Alabama, of course, was declared unconstitutional. Well, does it ever occur to you that there may be thousands of laws that are unconstitutional that people are obeying and just blindly following day after day because it's the law and they don't know any different? What we're going to do then is to look at our Constitution and we're going to determine whether or not the law applies to me. If it applies to me, then I guess I'll have to obey it. And if it doesn't apply to me, then I'm not going to obey it. And the biggest group of people, you know, in this country that are espousing pro se law are the tax protesters and the tax rebels, as they've been branded by the IRS. I prefer to call those people patriots. But you know, in talking to many of those patriots, I find that many of them are not tax patriots, they are tax evaders. You see, the income tax is a constitutional tax. It's got a false label hung on it, and the 16th Amendment is a constitutional amendment. It's not the income tax amendment, it's the excise tax amendment when you understand it. And the Supreme Court has ruled that way. And as I'm going to show you as we go through here, it doesn't make any difference whether you believe what I tell you or not, because what I think and what I believe isn't even important. The highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. And when the Supreme Court says this is the way it is in this country, that's the way it is. As Walter Cronkite would say, that's the way it is. And when the Supreme Court says that's the way it is, you let me know if you know of some other appeal, because I don't know of any. So the 16th Amendment is constitutional, and there's a lot of people out there that are just jumping up and down and saying, why, that's an obscenity, and it's unconstitutional, and it violates the Constitution, it violates rights. Well, I don't believe that, and the Supreme Court of the United States doesn't believe that. And if you think I'm some kind of a turncoat radical, I don't pay the income tax. I'm not a person required to file and pay income. I don't have any income. I used to have income. And when I found out what income and compensation was and how the 16th Amendment worked, you know, I said, wait a minute, I don't think I want to volunteer into that system anymore. I think I'll just get out of that. And so I got out of it. And I show other people how to get out of it. And when we get further into this course, I'm going to show you how to get out of the income tax. But does that mean that if you drop out of the income tax, the IRS is going to say, oh, I recognize you, Mr. Gordon. You dropped out of the income tax. Well, of course, you don't have to file. We understand all about you, Mr. Gordon, and so have a nice day. You think any IRS agent's going to say that about me? Let me tell you. When this film starts hitting the country coast to coast, I'm going to be nailed by 10 or 15 federal suits and or attempts to put me in prison by the IRS. But I'm prepared to argue my position to the United States Supreme Court because my position is founded upon Supreme Court decisions. So when I get to Washington, I'm going to say, now you gentlemen said in 1909 thus and so. And then in Stone Tracy you said so and so. And then in addition to that, in Bruchaber versus UP Railroad, here's what you said. And in Hale versus Hinkle, you told me this, and I relied upon that in good faith, gentlemen. And it's for that reason that I didn't file, and it's for that reason that I don't pay. You see how that works? And that's the way you want to found your foundation right from the scene of the crime on. You want to found your foundation in Supreme Court law and decision. Not in by guess and by golly, and I think maybe, and I heard Joe say that he filled out a Fifth Amendment return, and I'm not saying Fifth Amendment returns are bad, but I'm not sure that a Fifth Amendment return is right in every case, and I've never seen a case in my particular circumstance where the Fifth Amendment would ever apply. Now, there are some times when it might, but you want to know and understand how the law works before you get into it. And you'll be amazed at how many people come to this school and say, Mr. Gordon, I'm going to go in on a DWI in about 4 days. Would you tell me how to win? Yeah. What you do is you go in there and you plea bargain, because I don't think you're going to win. You know, you can't go into the courtroom ignorant and expect to win your first time out. You need some knowledge. You need some ability. You need some training. And that's why everyone is so fearful of those prosecutors and judges, because no one understands the language. It's a foreign language. It's spoken in foreign. They use foreign rules, and it's a process that is totally foreign. You know, you've been educated in your government school, and your government school taught you how to be a slave, not how to be a free man. They taught you how to get a driver's license, didn't they? All right, let's go on. No monopoly can exist without the gun barrel of government threat and coercion. Now, I want to explain that for a moment, because, you know, mobs of people will go to their legislators and they will lobby and write letters to the editor to get laws changed or laws passed to benefit their particular group, their association, their union, their trade association. That creates a monopoly by law. And you can't break those monopolies. because those monopolies have those uniformed thugs out on the street with badges on their chests and guns on their hips. And if you go running around there trying to break up those monopolies, you get in a lot of trouble. Now, how does an individual then get his due process of law? He gets it on the courtroom floor. He doesn't get it by writing letters to the editor and by rebelling against those policemen out there on the street. Those policemen out there are real rough and tough. They beat you right up, you know. You got to be careful about those kind of people. But bear in mind that monopoly doesn't occur in the marketplace, and monopoly doesn't occur under our Constitution. Monopoly occurs by the gun barrel of government coercion. And when you run into the gun barrel of government coercion, you better back off, and you better be prepared to go into the courtroom to demand rights, because where rights are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation that would abrogate them. I can't break up some union, but let me tell you, there isn't any union monopoly that can control my life. Now, I'm not saying they won't kill me, or that they won't in some way beat me up in some way, but let me tell you, when I go into the courtroom, I can demand and I can obtain my rights. Now, I don't know about mobs of other people, because, you know, it's advantageous for a mob of lawyers to go out and create a monopoly so that no one else can practice law. And I can understand that. And boy, let me tell you, I'm not going to go out there and practice law. You don't see my name out there in the yellow pages. You don't see George Gordon out here dispensing legal advice in competition with that monopoly. I understand the power of the gun barrel. That's right. I understand that. But, I'll tell you what I do. See, I don't go out and practice law. I know the law. So therefore, I'm not a practitioner of law. So what I do is I teach law. Can I teach law? Oh yeah, that's right. My First Amendment right guarantees me the right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. So what I do is I'm not going to advise you as to law. I'm going to teach you the law. I'm not going to sell you a fish. I'm going to teach you how to go fish. I'm going to teach you how to go into that courtroom and fish. So be careful of those government monopolies. Now I'm going to teach you step by step how to get out of the way, because when that locomotive is coming down the track, we don't stand in front of the locomotive with the 50 cars behind it and try to stop it. What I teach my students to do is go down there and pull up about 3 rails and then get the hell out of the road. And then when the train runs off the track and tips upside down, then you walk over with a hammer and you bust the headlight out. That's the way you deal with the Bar Association. That's the way you deal with the gun barrel of government monopoly. The ultimate source of all rights is God. You know, God comes first, then came man, then came our Constitution, then came our government, then came the bureaucrat. Remember that order. It's God, man, Constitution, government, bureaucrat. Today the bureaucrat's up on top. He's directing man. He's kicked out our Constitution. He thinks the government is God and that he's the king and that we're all slaves. And so it's bureaucrat, government, no Constitution. And God's down on the bottom somewhere, and then we're somewhere below that, and we're regulated and governed by bureaucrats. Well, that's true, but it doesn't have to be true. If you volunteer to be a slave, then you are going to be a slave. But you don't have to volunteer, and you can stop volunteering anytime you want. And to get that order of power and authority in the right perspective, I recognize God as the sovereign, and I get my inalienable rights from God, and I gave some of those rights and powers to my government through the Constitution, and bureaucrats work for me, and that's why they're called public servants. People who work for government are servants of servants, and I'm a sovereign, and I don't work for my public servants. My public servants don't come into my office and put their feet up on my desk and make demands upon me telling me that I'm going to pay some tax. If anybody's going to tell some public servant how he's going to behave, I'm going to tell that public servant how he's going to behave. Number 8, respect power, but always question authority. I want to know by what authority you do these things. Where did you get these powers? When you begin to ask bureaucrats by what authority or power they're acting, 99 times out of 100 they begin to backpedal and back up, because they're not used to talking to a citizen who is a sovereign. They're used to talking to subjects and members who come in and, for instance, to the Department of Employment. You're going in to sign up for unemployment insurance. And have you ever seen a dog, crawl up to its master, and the master will kick it, and you notice he'll crawl a little lower and wag his tail just a little bit sharper, and he'll come to his master and, please don't kick me again, master. Well, what happens when you walk in and, wait a minute, who owns this? I own this. All of you people in here work for me. Now, I'm in here to sign up for benefits pursuant to a contract that I've signed with my employer. I'm unemployed and I'm here to collect pursuant to that contract. Have you got a form for me? I want to fill that out. The attitude that you have is going to determine the kind of response you get from your public servant. When you act like a servant, they're going to treat you like a servant. If you can act like a sovereign, they'll treat you like a sovereign. And if they don't want to treat you like a sovereign, how about asking them, by what authority are you doing this? Because when you know a little law, you're going to find out that all of a sudden they don't have any powers other than what's been delegated to them. And under Title 42, Section 1983, when they willingly and maliciously deprive you of your civil or constitutional rights, they're not protected by any government agency. They're suable and they're prosecutable of and by themselves and on their own. And it's about time that we let them know that. You violate my rights, I'm going to put you in the penitentiary. Now sit down over there and let's talk about this claim. You respect power, but you question their authority. And you'll find out that they'll back down. Number 9, when in doubt as to what to do next, attack. The one thing I never do is let a sleeping dog lie. I'll kick him and find out if he's sleeping or dead. When the IRS stops writing you letters, you should be writing them letters and saying, why don't we have a meeting? Why don't we have a hearing? I want to tell you what's on my mind, and I want to talk to you about law, and I want to talk to you about Hill versus Hinkle and Brushaber versus UP Railroad, and I want to talk to you about definitions and meanings, and I want to know where you think you got the power to haul me into court or to put some kind of a lien on my property. That's what I do. It works pretty well. As I tell my students, if you're not having fun at those IRS meetings, you're not conducting them correctly. And that's exactly what I'm telling you. I don't go to an IRS meeting and have that meeting conducted. I go in and conduct it. And that's what you need to learn how to do. Number 10, in this war there is no substitute for victory. Did you hear that from General MacArthur? You're either going to win or you're going to lose. And I'm a very poor loser, so therefore I only know how to win. And that's why I'm such a tiger when I get in the courtroom or when I get on a case, because I won't ever get off that case until 1, I win, 2, they surrender, or 3, Chief Justice Berger tells me to get out of Washington. Then I'll concede defeat. Number 11, to invoke the exclusionary rule, you must demand probable cause, a Fourth Amendment warrant, and a lawyer. That exclusionary rule we're going to get into hot and heavy in lessons 3 and 4. Lessons 3 and 5. And we're going to talk about how to pull that exclusionary rule down. If it can work for Miranda, it can work for John Q. Citizens. The Supreme Court is interested in protecting the rights of individuals, but unfortunately the only individuals that they ever come in contact with are the criminals from penitentiaries or corporate entities. You take a look in the U.S. Supreme Court reports, and in almost every one of those cases, I'll bet you 90% of them deal with corporations that have money and will go into the courtroom. Well, any housewife can go into the courtroom. There's nothing to prohibit you. It doesn't cost you a dime. They can charge you with speeding at 90 miles an hour, and it doesn't cost you a dime to argue that case clear to the U.S. Supreme Court, so why shouldn't you? And get some cases in there. John Q. Public versus U.S. or U.S. versus John Doe. Let's start getting some citizen decisions in there. Why do we have to have decisions pursuant to IRS rulings that go like this: U.S. versus UP Railroad, and U.S. versus Montgomery Ward, and U.S. versus Sears Roebuck? Why not U.S. versus George Gordon or U.S. versus Robert Hallstrom or U.S. versus whoever you are? Well, it's because people who are wage earners and people who are businessmen and people who are just average run-of-the-mill Joe Dokes, they sit there and say, well, it costs too much to hire a lawyer, which is the outgrowth of our public school system, as I call them, the government school system, that sent you in there and then brainwashed you into thinking that if you're a person, you're totally incompetent in everything except what you're trained to do. So if you're a computer programmer, you are totally incompetent at law, medicine, economics. You can't do anything other than what you're trained to do. And if you think that's not right, isn't it a fact that when you're sick you go to a doctor? I haven't been to a doctor for 10 years, maybe 20. I think the last time I went to a doctor was when I went to get a physical for my third-class medical. And he didn't know what he was doing. All I wanted was his signature on the bottom of the paper, and I paid him $30 to give it to me. He didn't have to even look at me. And after he looked at me, he didn't know any more when he got through than when he started. I don't go to a lawyer when I want to know something. I go to the law library and look it up. I can read and write. I'm literate. You're looking at a real rare breed here. I not only can read, I can write. And I don't know of very many people that can read and write. I've had people come to me with judicial decisions and say, what does this mean? You know what I tell them? Why don't you look at it and read it, and probably means what it says. You've been taught that if you've got a legal paper, you have to take it to a lawyer because there's no one else that can understand it. They were doing that back in Christ's time. You know, in those days, they stole widows' houses. We don't do that anymore. We call that probate. We hang another label on it today. Number 12, 90% of all convictions are obtained through admissions and confessions. All right, so if you can keep your mouth shut up here on number 1 and recognize that 90%, oh, you're going to ask me, well, now, where'd you get that number? You just pulled it out of the air, didn't you? No, I didn't. I'll tell you where I got that. I got that from Miranda versus Arizona. And I believe that's called number 389, 436. Let me give you the citation on it. I'll tell you exactly where I got that. I got that from 384 U.S. 436. Miranda versus Arizona. My Supreme Court told me that. I don't know if they lied to me or not, but I'm going to take their word for it. That's right. 90% of the convictions are obtained through admissions and confessions. Well, that makes me pretty smart. I'm smart enough to shut up. I trained myself to keep quiet. I trained myself to pull the exclusionary rule down. I didn't go to law school. I can read and write. Number 13, a pro se must never plead but always stand mute. And when we get into the jurisdiction argument, I'll show you why you don't plead. But briefly, when you walk into the courtroom, the judge says, well, let's see now, you've been charged with driving 75 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone. How do you plead? Well, I plead guilty, Your Honor. And now what you've done is, well, I admit that I was driving 75, and I admit that that's a crime, and I admit that that's wrong, and I admit that I did it, and I waive all of my rights, and you just do with me whatever you see fit, massa. That's what guilty means. Okay, here's what not guilty means. How do you plead to those charges? Not guilty, Your Honor. I was driving the car all right, but I wasn't going 75 miles an hour. I'm subject to that law, and I recognize the criminal intent involved, and I recognize my obligation to obey that law, but I wasn't going 75. Mute. Your Honor, there are no charges before this court, and I stand mute. Now what have you told them? Wait a minute. Judge, it doesn't make any difference whether I was going 75 or 175. The law doesn't apply to me. And I'm challenging the jurisdiction of this court. You don't even have a capacity here to bring me in here and even ask me why I was driving 175 or 75. How fast I was driving isn't even relevant here. See the difference? Yeah, that's what that means. I'm going to show you how to bring jurisdiction into the matter. I'm going to show you how when you go in you can plead two categories of defense. That isn't the only two, but I'm saying the two major tactics for defense are these. One is procedure. You bog them down on procedure by making constitutional questions or creating constitutional questions. And then the issue isn't were you driving 75, but why didn't you allow him to have counsel, and why did you deny him due process of law, equal protection of the law, etc. That's procedure. The other is to stipulate to the facts pursuant to law. You know, people ask me sometimes, why, you don't want to admit that you cheat on your income tax, do you, Mr. Gordon? No, I don't want to admit that I cheat on my income tax. Well, why do you tell people you don't pay the income tax? Why not? I'm not a homosexual either. Why shouldn't I tell people? I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not a queer. I'm not a homosexual. And so I just tell people plainly I'm not one of those. But everybody has to pay the income tax. Well, I agree that everyone with income has to pay the income tax, but what if you don't have any income? Do you have to pay the income tax? When you go into these IRS meetings, you know, one of the first questions, well, did you bring your records and books in today, Mr. Gordon? Let me ask you a question before we proceed. What are records and books? Well, you know what records and books are. Sir, if I knew what the records and books were, I wouldn't ask you. I want you to tell me what... Well, checks and payroll journals and check registers, and those are books. Oh, are you asking me, did I bring in my checks, payroll journal, and check register? Yeah, that's right. No. What's the next question? See how much fun it is? I'm telling you, if you don't have fun in those IRS meetings, you're not conducting them correctly. A pro se must never plead then. When you're in that courtroom, you stand mute, even if the court does have jurisdiction. Don't plead. You can always plead later, but you don't have to plead while you're under threat, duress, and coercion. If you understand the charges against you, you're admitting to being competent to stand trial. And boy, if this isn't a real ruse on you. Mr. Gordon, you're charged with driving 75. Do you understand the charges? Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, I understand the intent and motive in the crime and the criminal conduct if you drive 75. My response is, understand the charge. What charge do we have? Well, you were driving 75. Where's the corpus delicti? Where's the loss of life, liberty, and property? Where's the contract that demands or prescribes specific performance, Your Honor? I don't understand why I'm standing here. I know why I came in here. I came into this court because this court has a habit of throwing people in jail and depriving them of their life, liberty, and property if they don't appear. And I want the record to clearly show, Your Honor, that I'm here under threat, duress, and coercion. I didn't voluntarily come into this jurisdiction. Now, are you accusing me of some crime? And if so, who's the victim? And where's the cause of action? Conversations break right down the first time or two, then the second time they'll try to bowl right over you. And we'll show you how to handle that as we go on. Boy, that courtroom drama, that really gets to be fun. That's better than Perry Mason. I have more fun than Perry Mason ever had. Number 15. At the scene of the crime, always demand probable cause, a Fourth Amendment warrant, and a lawyer. Don't ever forget that. Those are the three requisites now to the Miranda Doctrine and to the exclusionary rule. What's your name? I'm not sure I want to tell you. What? You're not going to tell me your name? Why, that's insane. Why, everybody tells me their name when I ask them. That's right. Everybody does. I agree. Well, why aren't you going to cooperate? I am cooperating, officer. Who told you I wasn't cooperating? Well, you're not answering my questions. Wait a minute. I've answered every question you asked me. Your problem is you just don't like the answers I'm giving you. Now I ask you another question, and you just watch and see if I don't answer it. Well, where do you live? I refuse to answer that question without counsel present. There you go again. You're not cooperating with me. I've asked you your name, and you wouldn't tell me, and now I've asked you where you lived, and you wouldn't tell me that either. I didn't tell you I wouldn't tell you my name, and I didn't tell you that I wouldn't tell you where I lived. I told you that pursuant to Miranda, I have a right to counsel present during each segment of this in-custody interrogation. Am I free to leave? No! Oh, if I'm not free to leave, I'm in custody, and if I'm in custody, I want counsel. After all, I might be John Dillinger. I could be a guy that's escaped from prison 10 years ago. Do I want to tell him who I was? Do I want to give him my fingerprints or something? No, I want all of my constitutional protections. You're making an intrusion into my life, officer. I didn't stop you, you stopped me. And it's because you stopped me that I need to invoke my constitutional rights. Now, I've heard people say, well, you're not a good citizen. I didn't say I was a good citizen. I said I was a citizen who's demanding all of his rights. It's for you to determine whether I'm good or bad in your own mind. In my mind, I'm a good guy, and I'm a good citizen, and I think you're a good citizen too, officer. I just think you're a little ignorant. I don't think you understand the law. But I'm not making any accusations. Yeah, conversations break down on about the third or fourth question, sometimes on the first or second. Sometimes they'll get so mad they'll arrest you and throw you in jail. That's right, right off the bat. I had an officer ask me, I want to see your driver's license. I want to see your Fourth Amendment warrant probable cause, and I want a lawyer present right here. You're under arrest. Oh, okay. I understand that. Are you going to tell me who you are? No. I'm already under arrest. I don't have to tell him who I am. He didn't ask me who I was. He demanded a driver's license. Well, if I don't have a driver's license, can't give him one. What if he'd have demanded a $20 double eagle? I couldn't have produced that either. Number 16, always demand all of your rights at all times, at every hearing, and with every piece of correspondence. When you file motions, when you sign that ticket, if you sign the ticket. I'm not telling you shouldn't sign a ticket. I don't know what you should do. I'm just going to tell you what I do. Sometimes I sign them, sometimes I don't. Depends on the circumstance. Depends on the officer. If he treats me nice, I sign the ticket. If he treats me nasty, I make him arrest me. When he arrests me, I sue him. That's the way that comes down. Oh, you're going to say, well, gosh, that takes a lot of time, effort, and energy. Yeah, that's right. But they don't arrest me very often. In fact, I had a judge the other day who wouldn't arrest me. I went in the courtroom. He told me he wanted me to pay a $150 bond. And I said, gee, that's interesting. What are you going to do to me if I don't pay it? Well, are you going to put me in jail? No. Okay. Are you going to steal my car or something? No. Mr. Gordon, you should appeal this. Well, maybe I should, but what if I don't want to appeal it? Then what are you going to do to me? You going to put me in jail? You going to take my liberty away from me? You know, there are some judges that recognize and understand that I know more law than they do. Or, put another way, I may not know more overall law, but I'll bet you I know more constitutional law than most judges do. I bet I read more cases than they do, and I'll bet you that whether I'm right or wrong, they're very fearful of me, and I notice that they don't harass me too badly. I have a good rapport with judges. I like judges. I have some problem with policemen. Number 17, always demand counsel of your choice under the Sixth Amendment at every hearing until you get it or until you establish reversible error. Now, let me show you something. I told you early on that I'm in that courtroom to win, and I don't care whether the judge dismisses, the prosecutor dismisses, the jury finds me guilty, or some appeals court reverses the decision. I don't care how the victory comes. I'll take it any way I can get it. You ever seen a fighter that said, well, if I can't get a knockout, I'm not going to accept the victory? He doesn't care how he gets the victory. He's there to win. And that's the way I'm there. And you are in that courtroom to create reversible error. You can create reversible error right at the scene of the crime while the officer is sitting there writing the ticket, if you know how to do it. Why, it's not unreasonable to demand your constitutional rights right there at the scene of the crime, or the alleged scene of the crime. You demand the counsel present. Oh, you're not going to give me counsel. Why did you deny me counsel? Why did you interrogate me? Why did you ask me all these questions? I mean, here's this guy asking you for your Social Security number and your birthday, and he's not even going to bring you a cake, and he's not sending you a Social Security check. Isn't that interrogation? He's asking you incriminating questions. What if you're down here cheating on your Social Security? You know, you've got 2 jobs, and you're drawing Social Security, and you're only 39. You want to tell him your Social Security number? Do you have a right to remain silent? He doesn't know that you're guilty of some other crime. Do you have to confess to 5 other crimes because your taillight was out?